Just because we have responsibilities, it doesn't mean we can't have fun. Here's 10 short JRPGs that are worth playing, beginning with the indie title Arafel, which took me just over 14 hours to beat. Arafel was developed by Stegosoft Games, who some may know as the minds behind Rise of the Third Power, and fans of that game may find plenty to like here. What you'll notice immediately about Arafel is its charming presentation, utilising a timeless pixel-based approach that pays homage to the games of old. You've got a solid turn-based combat system with 4 main characters, and even though you don't really have a choice in who you include in the active party, each member has a specific quest that branches out their class further if you take the time to explore. Talking about the characters, they themselves are written fairly well, though it does struggle to strike a balance between serious and comical at points, which can be off-putting for some scenes. It also has to be mentioned that at its core, Arafel is an indie game, and as such it is limited by its budget. It's clear the developers put a great deal of care into the game, but there are some frayed edges like the artwork and confusing map. Despite those issues though, Arafel is a nice little journey boasting excellent value for your money. And keeping it focused on indie titles, next up is a neat little gem called Shadows of Adam that took me 12 hours to beat. What I have to give this game real praise for is that despite being a short game, it packs that time with meaningful content, like backgrounds on each character and how it shapes them into who they are in the present age. Though again, the dialogue does sometimes overstretch to juvenile levels, it's mostly consistent and I was fully on board with the developments in the narrative itself. Everything flowed quite well. In terms of gameplay, it's a turn-based system reminiscent of Mystic Quest, but far better. Instead of traditional MP, each character has a pool of ability points, and each ability will drain said gauge. It recovers over time during battle, but there's certainly a need to manage it well. The options between characters also feel intuitive. You can unleash some pretty neat combos by combining their abilities. There's no doubt that at times the balancing is a bit off, and more often packs of enemies are more threatening than main story bosses, but it's not at the level where it becomes egregious. I will also mention that those who aren't a fan of puzzles might be taken aback here, as the game sports quite a lot of them, and the variety of treasure on offer is lacking at points, meaning exploration isn't as strong as it could have been. But once again, the positives outweigh the problems for Shadows of Adam. It's a nice callback to the olden days, but does enough by itself to ensure it doesn't need to lean on that legacy. Add on to that a great OST, nice presentation and excellent value for money, and this game is worth a try. Last on the indie train is Cosmic Star Heroine that took me 11 hours to beat. Developed by Zeboid Games, I dare say this one will be the most well known among the trio. The art style alone will immediately have you drawing that Chrono Trigger comparison. Also a plus, there are no random encounters, which is always a good sign in my book. Combat itself though is easily the best part about the game. Each character comes equipped with a multitude of abilities that are either derived from their own individual progression or the equipment they wear. Battle pacing gradually increases as the fight continues, with each combatant including the enemies gaining style, which increases damage, and the hyper mode mechanic allows you to plan in advance for heavy hitting attacks. In terms of the narrative, you've got a journey that's reminiscent of some of your favourite sci-fi hits of yesteryear. While there are some notable pacing issues, Cosmic Star Heroine should be applauded for what it sets out to do in terms of its story, giving us a wide cast of diverse characters and some fairly strong dungeon design. That praise extends to the OST as well, which is very good, and that's coming from someone who places a lot of weight on that aspect. Cosmic Star Heroine is certainly not perfect, but it has a following for a reason. And not to rain on Zeboid Games' parade here, but if I had to choose between this and their recently released This Way Madness Lies, I'd always be picking Cosmic Star Heroine. Moving on now to Mega Man, no joke, it's the first Mega Man battle network that took me just over 13 hours to beat. I dare say many people are familiar with the blue android from his time on the SNES with the X games, but Capcom weren't content to end it there. On top of bloating the heck out of that sub-series, they also decided to create another split when the Game Boy Advance came around, creating both Mega Man Zero, which sported side-scrolling action similar to the older titles, but also delving into RPGs with Mega Man Battle Network. In this game you take the role of a boy called Lan, who uses Mega Man as a sort of antivirus.exe to explore cyberspace and take out malicious programs. It sounds weird, but it's actually utilised pretty well, and it leads to some fairly strong character development as far as early handheld games go in any case. Battles take place on a 3x3 grid, and you basically exchange shots with enemies. These battles will also see a gauge fill, which will allow you to access a collection of chips that support you further in the fight. The game is certainly worth mentioning through merit alone, but there's an added reason in that it's the best time to get involved considering the very recent release of the Legacy Collection on Switch, PS4 and PC. While it is noted by fans that the quality of the games diminish as they go on, especially for the 5th and 6th entries, drawing a parallel to the X series in that regard, they're still considered serviceable. We move now to Ys and the first of the Napishtim engine titles in Ys 6 Ark of Napishtim, which took me 12 hours to beat. Lauded as the game that revived the series after a near 10-year hiatus, Ys 6 sees Adol stranded on the Canaan Islands, an archipelago surrounded by vortex and housing both humans and demi-beast people. Being the first of its type and a soft reboot for the series, Ark of Napishtim has elements that are polished in the subsequent releases of Oefenfeldganner and Origin, but that doesn't mean that Ark isn't a good game in of itself. It was one of the first titles to use the pre-rendered backgrounds and sprites, a style that would continue on in Ys and indeed the Trails series too, and it also reverted back to the fast-paced action of the original title, something that had been lost in Ys 5. What makes Ys 6 a joy to play is its sense of adventure. Ys games are fantastic at demonstrating this particular point, and Ark is arguably one of the better in this regard. Adol is free to pretty much go wherever he wants, even to highly dangerous areas that can lead to a quick death, though the game will give you warnings through NPC dialogue. Ark of Napishtim doesn't hold the hand of the player, allowing them to explore on their own terms, and as such the sense of progression is strong throughout. Being one of the later entries canonically, it also draws on events of previous games to add further to the story on offer here, though it's still strong as a standalone regardless. Ys 6 may have some aged mechanics here and there, but its blueprint and legacy cannot be understated, and even now it still stands as a solid entry in the series. Up next is one of the more comfy entries on the list, and it's for Rhapsody, a musical adventure which took me 10 hours to beat. Originally released in 1998 for the PlayStation and then later coming to DS and Steam, Rhapsody is a classic in many eyes, going down a route not seen in many other titles. To put it simply, it's the RPG version of a 90s Disney film. It's very light-hearted with the most basic premise that has been around since the dawn of literature, but in between you're treated to some musical numbers that convey the feelings of the characters or act as a method to push the story along. Though they sound odd, they were actually the highlight of the game for me. Gameplay, on the other hand, will depend on the version you play, though I dare say many will play it on PC, and thus they will partake in the original iteration, that being over a tactical grid. The DS version, on the other hand, utilised the standard turn-based approach. It doesn't matter at all though, because for the most part the game is absurdly easy, which aids in its more cosy vibes, though anyone looking for a challenge will be disappointed. The real issue with Rhapsody is that it's very much old school in its approach to progression. The direction given to the player is minimal at many points and requires you to backtrack on a few occasions for no discernible reason. Compounding that problem is that the encounter rate is absurdly high. So yeah, it has issues for sure, but there are certainly players who enjoyed it for what it was and have a special place for it in their mind. And just like Mega Man Battle Network, this is the best time to get involved, as the Mile Kingdom Chronicles, that being a collection of the two sequels, are finally coming west for the first time in full this year. So if you like this one, you'll have even more to delve into. Keeping it cozy once again, we move now to Nora and the Time Studio, which took me 16 hours to beat over 2 playthroughs. What do you get when you combine Etrian Odyssey, Atelier and Atlas into one whole? Well, you get this game. Now admittedly, Nora is not an accessible title. It was never translated into English, and the only way we are able to play it is due to a fan translation. However, if you persevere, it is 100% worth the efforts. Nora and the Time Studio plays out like Atelier in that it has a very minor focus on story, heavier input from characters, and indeed a crafting system that takes centre stage. Nora herself is on a pilgrimage of sorts to ascend beyond her novice chronomancer status. In order to do this, she has to spend 3 years in the Misty Forest to hone her skills. These 3 years translate into a time limit that Atelier fans may be familiar with, but it's far from an added stressor. It's never looming over your head, and the game is short enough that if you do screw up and get a bad ending, you can at least restart and finish a second playthrough in a day if you really want to. The gameplay loop is also as simple as it gets, but still addicting. You'll go to exploration fields to gather materials, get involved in turn-based combat here and there, and then work with what you've gathered to deepen your armory of recipes. During this period, you can also pursue character stories, and this is where you may want to jump into some additional playthroughs. You won't be able to see all of these stories in one go, but 2 playthroughs allow me to pursue the stories of my favourite characters, and get the best ending as well. It's a shame that this one never came west officially, but I'm always happy to spread the good word on it. Up next are the strategy RPG pair of Langrisser 1 and 2, remade back in 2019, and they each took me around 15 hours to beat. Langrisser is one of the OG SRPG franchises. It's been around since way back in 1991, but was sadly forgotten over time, having over a decade hiatus from the year 2000, and it's never really caught up to contemporaries like Fire Emblem even with this remake. Saying that, Langrisser 1 and 2 are still a solid duo of titles. Like Nora and the Time Studio, it does have replayability on offer, mostly through its branching paths, so if you want to see more of what it has to offer, then it has you covered. For me though, one playthrough was enough on each and I just watched the other endings on YouTube, but they were a nice palate cleanser in between the longer titles I was playing at the time, and though Langrisser 1 certainly has flaws, mostly in regards to story and character depth, there's no doubt that if you see that through, you'll have a much better time in Langrisser 2, which I consider to be superior in every way. Next up is an often overlooked gem in The World Ends With You that took me just over 16 hours to beat. Now granted, I had to stretch with this one because The World Ends With You can easily take you well over 60 hours to complete with all its extra content in the Switch version final remix. However, if you're just focusing on that main story with some sprinklings of side content, which is what I did, it'll take you considerably less time. For my shorter playthrough, I was satisfied with what I saw, enough so that I quickly bought the sequel as well in Neo The World Ends With You soon after. I was immediately captivated by how fresh The World Ends With You felt. The art style was sharp and pleasing on the eyes, and you notice almost immediately the amazing soundtrack. It's no wonder fans were clamoring for a restock of Neo's physical OST quite recently. It's also pretty strong on the gameplay side too. You control the protagonist Neku and guide him through Shibuya as he attempts to survive the Reaper's game, with each day representing a new challenge for him and his partner. During those days you'll be fighting the so-called Noise, using pins as your method of attack. These pins each represent a different power that Neku can use, and they're activated in varying ways. However, this is where the problem will mostly lie for players. The controls are very much hit and miss considering the title was originally designed for the DS. Referencing the Switch version here, which I imagine is what many will play should they choose to pick it up, there are two ways you can control Neku. You can use a Joy-Con with the Switch docked, or you can hold the tablet in your hands and use your fingers or a stylus. I opted for the latter option, and I can't deny I never got used to this. I'd much prefer a traditional controller, especially when some of the pins require very specific actions to use. However, if you can get past this, you'll be rewarded with a compelling action RPG, reinforced with a strong narrative and banging soundtrack. The last one on this list is the remade Live Alive, which took me around 20 hours to beat. Live Alive doesn't progress in the standard fare for a JRPG, in fact it's more an amalgamation of different gameplay styles, but it's that diversity that works in its favour. The structure of the game is such that you'll be playing through different eras which all house their own unique protagonist. Though the core turn-based gameplay remains mostly the same, each era has unique gimmicks that set them apart from the rest, and that's not just limited to gameplay. Some of them are going to have cheesy openings reminiscent of the early 90s, while others won't have any dialogue at all. It's that sense that you never know what Live Alive will throw at you that makes it so enjoyable to play. And though I admit some eras are better than others, I feel there is something for everyone in this game, and it's structured in a way that you can easily complete an era per night if you really wanted to. It's a great little title that utilises that timeless 2.5D style that's dominating the landscape lately, and even better, it's now moving away from its exclusivity on the Switch and coming to PS4, PS5 and Switch at the end of April this year. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe for more JRPG content, and consider joining my Patreon if you're interested. Peace.